innocence and vulnerability into a unique and alluring persona. But there was more to Marilyn Monroe than met the eye. Much more. Marilyn Monroe lived a haunted private life, which ended on August 5, 1962. Her death has been labeled a tragedy, a mystery, inevitable. But to those who knew the real Marilyn Monroe, her death has a different explanation: murder. Marilyn Monroe was laid to rest on August 8, 1962. Since that day, questions have continued to swirl around the circumstances of her death. Was Marilyn despondent over the changing fortunes in her career? Were Marilyn's romantic links to President Kennedy and his brother Robert Kennedy the reason she died? Was her death the result of an accidental overdose of sleeping pills, or a deliberate, premeditated conspiracy to keep her quiet? Over the years, these and other questions have puzzled investigators.
I did not think that she was ready to kill herself. No, I did not.
I just think that it was not suicide. I do not think Marilyn committed suicide.
Marilyn Monroe did not commit suicide. She was murdered.
She was a girl that knew too much, and she ended up dead one morning.
Marilyn Monroe was many things to many people. Sex symbol, actress, frightened orphan, friend, lover. To Bob Slater, Marilyn Monroe was all this and more. Bob Slater has been investigating her death for nearly 30 years. He has dedicated these years to seeking the truth about one of his closest friends.
She seemed to have a certain radiance when she walked into a room, which I have found very few people to have, that could pretty much hold you spellbound. I mean, not just the exotic shape and the way she moved and the way she looked, but there was a certain magnetism that drew one to her.
Actress Terry Moore knew Marilyn's private side.
She was a very simple girl, and I mean that in the nicest sense. She was not complicated. She was Norma Jean, who when she put on this beautiful, glamorous makeup became Marilyn Monroe. People complicated her life, situations, studios, but she always remained little Norma Jean.
At the time of Marilyn's death, Jeannie Carmen was her neighbor and close friend.
Once the doors were closed, she was Norma Jean, just a normal girl. She didn't use all that crazy talk or lip motion. She was just a normal kid that wore dirty bathrobes and everything.
B.B. Goddard's parents raised Marilyn. B.B. was like her foster sister.
She really was a very vivacious, fun person, a wonderful sense of humor, and she really helped me along with that bad period in my life.
Alex Darcy co-starred with Marilyn in one of her earliest hit pictures.
Then we start rehearsing some scenes, and she was never satisfied. It was never good enough, you know. Well, she was competing with two pretty tough opponents, Betty Grable and Lauren Bacall.
The big people in the industry never took her seriously. The public did. The world has. They all loved her and accepted her. But it was so unreal to see that Hollywood didn't. And she was so afraid of being a laugh, and she wanted to prove herself always.
Well, I think Marilyn was very insecure. She was insecure about her looks, about her not being born in the right family, and being in all the orphanages. But she was strong when it came to certain things, like making deals. She got pretty tough there at the end. And she was gaining power. Personally, I think she had too many psychiatrists. I think they were making her more insecure by the day.
If Marilyn Monroe was the greatest star on the movie scene, John F. Kennedy was her counterpart in the political world. The two were destined to meet. and in 1954, a casual acquaintance turned into a love affair. The two saw each other often, later assisted in their illicit rendezvous by the Secret Service, or more often with the help of Jack Kennedy's brother-in-law, Peter Lawford. Their romantic relationship was no great secret.
Marilyn attended a lot of parties at Peter Lawford's house on the beach, and I was also there during the time that she was there and the Kennedys were there.
Jack Kennedy in person had such charisma, even more so than it ever photographed. Not only was he a handsome, attractive man, but he was the #1 man in the world, most powerful man in the whole world. And Marilyn loved powerful men. She loved intellectual men, intelligent men. He was certainly everything that any woman could visualize, Jack Kennedy. He was every woman's dream.
I kind of think Jack was a bit of a user, and he wanted to make sure that he hit every woman that was around that he wanted to hit. He hated to know that he might miss one.
We know now, 30 years later, that there's been books coming out by even some Kennedy scholars that have pinpointed JFK's romances, and there are many. He had boasted that he had bedded something like about 1,300 different females.
I think it was only known in the industry. I don't think it ever got out to the public. I don't think the public would believe it if they heard it. They would close their minds to it. The public doesn't want to hear stuff like that. But the industry knew. I mean, they were very brazen.
It was pretty well known. Rumors were all over the place. There was another actress that Jack was supposed to meet down in Palm Springs, and they'd go in and close the door, and the FBI would guard the place. I don't remember her name either.
As the pressures of John Kennedy's presidency increased, he had to distance himself more and more from Marilyn. In an attempt to placate her, Jack sent his brother Robert, the Attorney General of the United States, to Los Angeles to speak with Marilyn. By early 1962, what had started as an infatuation with Jack Kennedy had become a passionate love affair with Bobby. At first, Marilyn was living out a dream. That dream soon turned into a nightmare.
With Bobby, she believed he loved her. She really believed that he loved her, and that he would be president, and that she would be first lady.
Marilyn bought it all away. She thought that he was going to marry her and leave the family. She was naive enough to think that he really cared and that it would work. I don't know what he told her, if he said that he wasn't happy with the family or what, but in the heat of passion he must have said something interesting because she bought it.
At the time of Marilyn and Bobby's affair, the Attorney General was engaged in an all-out war with Teamster President Jimmy Hoffa, who had strong ties to organized crime. Bobby Kennedy soon personalized the attack. Over the course of this conflict, the two men grew to hate each other, and finally, Hoffa decided to fight back. He enlisted the services of a wiretapper named Bernie Spindell. According to investigators, Spindell soon placed bugs at Marilyn's home.
I know that most of the phone calls to me, she called from phone booths because she was so paranoid about her phone being bugged.
There was two entities that was concerned about the wiretaps and bugs in Marilyn's house. One was from the mafia side of the track. The other was from the government entity.
In the early morning of December 15, 1966, New York State Police staged a raid on Spindell's home. Stating that they were there to confiscate illegal wiretapping equipment, they also took a number of tape recordings.
Later, when Spindell was arrested and taken into New York City and put in jail, there are big front-page stories about how he applied for the return of his equipment and also for the return of the tapes. And there's one specific article which appeared in the New York Times and in the New York Journal-American at the time that he had tapes that would indicate that Marilyn Monroe did not commit suicide.
Marilyn kept a personal diary. she made a point of writing down some of her private conversations with Robert Kennedy. In this diary, Marilyn may have written out her own death sentence.
She did keep a diary, yes. I saw it. And so did Bobby. That's why Bobby got very angry. It was the day that I was there that he discovered it. And he said, "Marilyn, what is this?" And she just said, "Oh, well, I've just been keeping some notes so that I could remember what, to talk about with you and all that." And he threw it on the couch or the table, and he said, get rid of this, immediately. And that's when the relationship started going down the tubes.
I always felt that diary was a walking time bomb she was carrying around with her and keeping in her file cabinet, which, by the way, was broken into the night of her death.
Apparently, Marilyn was also under surveillance in her own home. At the time of her death, her psychiatrist was Dr. Ralph Greenson. According to investigators, Greenson arranged for Eunice Murray to become Marilyn's housekeeper. Mrs. Murray was to play a pivotal role in the death of Marilyn Monroe.
And Marilyn was getting very suspicious of her. I don't think she knew why she was getting suspicious. She just started saying, "Mrs. Murray is acting very weird, and I wonder what's going on." She was getting very suspicious.
And it wasn't known until long after Marilyn's death, and probably back in the mid-'70s, when Mrs. Murray wrote her autobiography about her times with Marilyn, that it was the first time that she ever admitted, and she didn't do this, I might say, to the police, but she admitted that she was a psychiatric nurse.